Speaker, let me just make sure people understand some facts in light of some of the charges that my colleague from Ohio just made, which are flat false. Number one, Mr. Meadows refused to show up for his deposition. The committee scheduled a deposition after extensive coordination with Mr. Meadows at a day that he chose, that he selected, and then he refused to show up. And he refused to show up to testify about non-privileged questions. So my colleague from Ohio can talk as much as he'd like about executive privilege and about George Washington and about the extent to which it's crucial for the survival of the Republic, with which I agree. But we are talking here about testimony about non-privileged materials. Secondly, Madam Speaker, I would say that we all on this side of the aisle used to be in agreement about what had happened on January 6th. There was a brief period of time, days perhaps, when we were in agreement. Standing perhaps at this microphone, the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, said this on January 13th. The President bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Unfortunately, Mr. McCarthy's position changed on this issue. Mr. McCarthy then voted against the resolution that would have created a bipartisan commission to investigate these matters, and he withdrew his nominees to this committee. Let me say that again. He withdrew his nominees to this committee. This committee is engaged in critical investigative and legislative activity for which there is no greater purpose in terms of Congress's responsibility, no matter what my colleague on the other side may claim in terms of Mr. Meadows. And now, Madam Speaker, I would like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the Vice Chair yielding. Last Tuesday, December 7th, the Select Committee received a letter from Mr. Meadows' lawyer telling us that his client's appearance for a deposition had become, and I quote, untenable. Something else happened last Tuesday. Mr. Meadows' book, The Chief's Chief, hit bookstores. This is a witness who's refusing to comply with the law and answer our questions in part because the former president has instructed him to do so, he says. He says that as chief of staff, he couldn't possibly disclose the conversations with the former president. But look at his book and you get more information about his confidential conversations with the former president than our committee did. This is from a section dealing with January 6th rally at the Ellipse. When he got off stage, President Trump let me know that he had been speaking metaphorically about the walk to the Capitol. He knew as well as anyone that we couldn't organize a trip like that on such short notice, end quote. That part is interesting because the Select Committee has a lot of questions about what the president said and did on January 6th. We have a lot of questions about how protests that day escalated into a riot. And Mark Meadows says he can't discuss these details with us, but apparently he can put them in his book. We've also learned from those very documents Mr. Meadows turned over that he was willing to discuss what the president was thinking with members of Congress. On January 3rd, Mr. Meadows was exchanging text messages with a lawmaker about the pressure campaign to get state legislatures to overturn the results of the election. In one text message to a lawmaker, Mr. Meadows wrote, he presumably being President Trump, quote, he thinks the legislatures have the power, but the VP has power too, end quote. The power to do what? We could guess the power to overturn the election results, the power to reject the will of the voters. And days later, a violent mob tried to get Vice President Pence to do just that. We'd like to ask Mr. Meadows about that, about what the former president thought. Days before the violent attack, Mr. Meadows was willing to share what he, President Trump, thinks, but he won't tell us. That's why Mr. Meadows' testimony is so important. That's why his privilege claims are so outrageous, and that's why we need to adopt this resolution. I yield back.